Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the hot topic, remote learning. This evening was organized by students on the Auraria campus. My name is Dominique Perez. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am an MSU Denver student studying criminal justice with a minor in Spanish. I am one of your hosts for today's hot topic.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Juan Gonzalez. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am also an MSU Denver student studying electrical engineering. I will be your second host for today's discussion. Today, we are both student event programmers who work as part of the tri-institutional team here at the Auraria campus. Today, we welcome faculty and staff who will provide their input on remote learning. This will be a casual conversation with campus leaders about remote learning and possibly provide helpful information for Auraria campus students. Online learning has existed for many years, but the pandemic forced universities to pivot to virtual educational experiences for their students. The last year has challenged everyone to rethink how learning happens and how it can happen. Some have embraced this opportunity, while others have struggled to adjust, not just students, but faculty and university staff as well. In the next hour, we will discuss topics about remote learning.
We have questions already set to ask the panelists, but we will also be accepting questions from everyone watching as well. Throughout the live event, you will be able to submit your questions to us to ask the panelists in the comment section. Given the limited time, we cannot guarantee all submitted questions will be asked during the event. Now, without further delay, here are our panelists. Speakers, if you would please introduce yourselves and give us a quick overview about your role and any other important information you feel might be relevant. Dr. Moreno, would you like to start?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Samantha Moreno. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Senior Director for Online Student Success at the University of Colorado. And we support all of our online students, and we'll hopefully talk about the difference between online learning and remote learning, or at least allude to the differences between the two. I'm also an adjunct instructor in our School of Education and Human Development, in our counseling program, and in our higher education student affairs program. It's nice to be here. Thank you for hosting this.
Thank you so much. Dr. Fleck, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Dr. Bethany Fleck Dillon, and I am a professor of psychology at Metropolitan State University of Denver. I actually teach not only in the psychology major, but also the human development and family studies major. My area of expertise is really developmental educational psychology. So how can we best teach anyone, but specifically children, all the way through our college students. And I didn't mention my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I've done a lot of research in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning on specifically online and remote type learning. So I hope that I can contribute to the conversation.
Thank you so much. Our team has prepared some questions about this topic. We are going to give about 2 to 5 minutes per question. I'll ask you to comment on the questions around this topic, but either of you, please feel free to add as you see fit. We really see value in all your expertise. Now, to start off the conversation, Dr. Moreno, this one will be for you. Do students get the same benefits or experience when comparing in-person, online, and remote learning?
Great, thank you so much. Learning is my perspective is that it's such an individualized thing. Everyone learns a little bit differently. So the experience that a student would have in an in-person class and in a remote class and an online might be different depending on the learning style that the student has. I can tell you just from personal experience, I teach both online, remote, and in person, and I'm sure Dr. Fleck has done the same. And the experiences are vastly different for students. The pandemic, of course, forced us into the remote learning environment, and it did so, from my perspective, sadly, in a very rapid manner. And so myself and other faculty had to quickly adjust, like in a matter of, a day or 2 days, what we would do in an in-person, perhaps do some experiential learning or activities in class. We had to adapt it very, very quickly in a remote learning situation. And so I think that just that adjustment was difficult for everybody. And getting used to being on Zoom in the remote courses or other platforms was incredibly challenging for folks because, if folks are working remotely for work, then that extends their Zoom time. So I think the experiences and the benefits are vastly different depending on the student and the student learning style and the point in time at which we were in this remote environment. I don't know if that fully answers it, but I think there are pros and cons to every modality for sure.
For sure, thank you. And then this one will be for Dr. Fleck. Thinking about the last year, has the transition to a mostly remote learning environment affected certain students more than others, or does it remain the same for everyone across the board?
So that's a really great question. And of course, it piggybacks off the last question about the benefits or the pros or cons of what remote learning looks like for all students. And so I think what we really have to do to kind of start off is talk a little bit about what the differences are when we say remote learning, because there's different types, and those different types are going to have different benefits or have different challenges for certain students. So what happened in the spring of 2020 when everybody pivoted and went online all of a sudden, that was really emergency remote instruction, so ERI. And that is a whole nother ball game than just regular remote instruction, because there was no time for faculty and students to prepare. Instructors of courses that are successful online have had time to really set out and lay out the course in a way that facilitates engagement and learning. And when we went that quickly in a emergency situation, that preparation time that was needed wasn't really, available. And then we moved into either summer or fall of 2020, and even now in the spring, and it could be a little bit more planned out. So now it's a more traditional kind of remote learning environment, but the question exists of whether or not there was any synchronous pieces to that, or it was all asynchronous. And the benefits to synchronous and asynchronous have been studied a lot in the literature. Some of the research has shown that when it's an asynchronous online course, the learning benefits can be equal to a face-to-face course. They haven't shown as much benefit to the synchronous courses. And that was a meta-analysis that kind of covered some of the literature on that topic. And so when we're thinking about this transition to remote and the different kind of ways that it happened, we have to think about when, the modality, and then the question that you asked was if it affected certain students more than others. And it certainly does. So it's going to be different based on socioeconomic status, so availability of technology for students, whether or not students are working outside of also going to school, how much time they can spend on their courses. And you see some of those barriers too when it's face-to-face learning. And so it definitely affected folks differently depending on those kind of different situations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fleck. This next one is going to be, so this next one is going to be for Dr. Moreno. When thinking about courses that were forced to go virtual, what are some cons of remote learning?
Well, I think, again, it depends on, and I appreciated Dr. Fleck's remarks about the emergency remote versus a more planned out remote learning. Some of the strategies. So let me back up for a second. The difference between remote instruction and online instruction are a little bit different. So an online course that is designed using online design principles, and it's often developed week by week with a thought to the overall course plan. Not that remote learning is not considered that way, but there are definitely learning strategies and pedagogy design that helps a student learn the material in a particular way. In remote learning, as Dr. Fleck mentioned, excuse me, they tend to be it tends to be synchronous, meaning in real time, like this webinar. So you log in and you perhaps listen to a lecture, have some interactive activities with your classmates, you go out into breakout rooms, et cetera, et cetera. As faculty, we have to be super creative about how we develop remote learning activities with, like, for example, if we were in a course where we did some hands-on design activity, how we might translate that into a remote or distance environment can be a little bit challenging. I think the our faculty have to be, all of us have to be really intentional about how we design a course for remote learning. And if, some cons to that might be that if we don't take the time to do that, the experience could turn into just a synchronous activity where students are passively listening to a lecture rather than being engaged in interactive kinds of activities. So I think those are some things to consider that could be more challenging, right? Or in my mind, a con if they're not really thought about in full. And I would love to hear from Dr. Fleck on this one too, not to take over your facilitation.
Yeah, sure. And this kind of piggybacks on what we've already been talking about with these pros and cons and whether this affects certain students more or less than others. A colleague and I did a survey study in the spring semester of 2020 to just see what students were thinking about their courses that had pivoted to emergency remote instruction. And the descriptive findings were actually pretty telling. So overall, there was like 474 students that took this. A lot of them were MSU Denver students, but it wasn't limited to that. So we did have participants from across the country. And some of the things that came out were a perception of decreased overall course evaluations. Just pulling this up, one of the differences, though, that I wanted to point out was that not only did everybody see that students evaluated their courses as less enjoyable, less interesting, less learning, and this is from the beginning to the end of that semester, less attention, less effort. So a lot of kind of negative things. One of the differences that was super interesting came when we looked at different races of students. So we evaluated whether or not students perceived the presence of cultural considerations and culturally related content in their courses, and also course flexibility, how flexible the instructor was. And compared to our Latinx and white students, it was our Black students who evaluated these dimensions of course quality as being significantly lower after the courses transitioned online. And so maybe it's an awareness of the issues of culture in classes that kind of brought that forward, or the historic lack of representation of just Black people across many disciplines. And so they're picking that up in the online or remote environment. But that was just another one of the things that we see when we think about the cons of what happened in that semester specifically. Now, I don't want to say that that's true when you just look at planned out, synchronous or asynchronous remote learning, online education, because if they're done right, they can be done really, really well. Great course, a great plan, great learning outcomes, right? But what we saw for remote instruction during the pandemic semester, specifically spring 2020, was less than exciting.
I agree. I think another, that's so interesting, your study. I think another couple piece to a drawback in either remote or online is that students and faculty have to think about communication or connection a little bit differently than we do when we're face-to-face, right? We also are, in a lot of cases, students are balancing multiple priorities. And so it may not work for some students to be synchronous, right? And to try to balance work and school and family and everything. Whereas, in online, it might also be hard for folks who are not used to creating their own structure. So I think there's drawbacks and positives to each type of modality. And I think as students, one of the recommendations I would have is to make sure that you're having some conversations with a mentor, with friends, with important folks to you, so that you can really discern what type of environment is going to be best for you. So if you are entering into an online course, are you really going to be able to, it's flexible, but do you have the ability to be structured enough to keep yourself accountable, or do you have somebody to help you? On the flip side, with remote, do you have the flexibility in your schedule to make sure that you're going to be able to attend all the Zoom classes? So lots to think about in terms of the different modalities.
Thank you. And then this question, either of you can answer it. Have communication barriers between faculty and students developed due to the forced transition to remote learning?
I think that Samantha touched on this a little bit just now, in that you do need to figure out a different way or a more nuanced way of connecting with students or with faculty, because they can't just see you when you have a question. If I'm lecturing, I can look and I can see somebody in the back who looks like they're thinking about something. And I can say, what's going on over there? Let's work on that. And you don't really have that, right, in the remote environment. And so there's different ways that you have to kind of try to facilitate that in-depth learning and communication when you're talking about engagement between faculty and with students. I think it can be done, and I think it can be done really well. I think it's a skill, just like lecturing is a skill that some instructors are just really engaging and really good at. And same thing with facilitating connections in the remote environment, but it takes effort and it's a different type of way to get that engagement.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This next question, kind of on a different perspective, kind of going off of both of your answers on the previous questions. There has been a mention of how students from low-income backgrounds tend to have less access to good technology, broadband internet, access, and quiet places to study, among other necessities for online learning. What are some strategies institutions of higher education have implemented to support these students?
Yeah, the digital divide, as we call it, existed before the pandemic, and it certainly was exacerbated by the pandemic. There was a study in UCLA, at UCLA, that found that 2 of every 5 households lacked computers, access to a computer or an internet. And if you take that and magnify that out, you can understand that the issues and concerns are absolutely real. And we have to really work closely together as a campus community to bridge the divide, frankly. And what's exciting to me is that the future round of federal funding that institutions are slated to receive, my perspective is that the IT departments and others around campus collectively need to put our heads together to help create a path where students would have access to technology both on and off campus. So we saw during the pandemic, many institutions were partnering with corporations to provide, like perhaps discounted internet. We had laptop loaning computers, hotspots that could certainly be lent out. But I think that there's still more to consider, when we think about the digital divide. So I think we also have to be, as instructors, very intentional when we're selecting software in our classes and our devices to make sure that everyone has equal access to it, and there's support available, and that there's technical and personal support. Because if you don't have a computer and you don't have access to the internet, and now all of a sudden you're going to be asked to do everything remotely in an environment where you've maybe done everything on your phone, for example, or maybe not. And there's a lot to learn, right? So there's an enormous amount of support that's needed for students and faculty for that matter, but mostly for students. I'll sort of stop there. And Dr. Fleck, what do you think?
Yeah, building off of that, it's not just about the access, which is that first part. It's also about how well you can use the technology, which was kind of the second part. And so we know that computer anxiety has a direct relationship with performance in remote learning. But one of the things that can mediate that performance is when you have a higher self-efficacy around computers, so computer self-efficacy, feeling like you are able to operate the computer. And I know that might sound silly since we've been on our computers this whole year, but for folks who haven't had that experience, if we can do something at the institutional level or as instructors to help students get to that point, then we can mitigate some of those negative effects on their performance and really on their learning is what we want to do.
Thank you both. Now just to give some insight and then kind of switch over to talking about the wellness and mental health aspect to this. Dr. Fleck, if you want to start this one, just to give some insight to those who don't know, what is Zoom fatigue and what causes it?
Sure. So this is actually not my area of expertise. However, I can tell you I'm tired of Zoom. I do know that sharing at a screen and blue light can have negative effects on learning, retention, sleep, and all those things that help us be better humans and do better in the learning environment. And so that exposure alone is going to have a negative impact on our ability to be successful in our courses. And so that's about where, to be honest, my expertise on Zoom fatigue ends.
Thank you. And then just like a follow-up question is, this one can be answered by either of you. Do you think that online meetings or school online is more tiring than it was in person? And is there such a thing as being fatigued while being remote?
Oh gosh, yes. This is not my area of expertise either, but having worked with students and worked, myself and with my team for the last year. I think what's more challenging about Zoom, and we have been suggesting this with students and playing around with it ourselves, is seeing yourself constantly in the live chat, in the live video session. That for psychologically, that something happens there. We almost have this bifurcated thing, right? Where we're looking at ourselves, making sure that we are, what we're worried about, what we're doing, how we look, et cetera, while we're trying to attend to and be present for other people and engage with the content all at the same time. And so that's very challenging. So we've been really encouraging folks to take down your own image while you're in a Zoom chat to help it more mirror the experience that you're having in a face-to-face environment. Because in a face-to-face environment, you can't see what's happening, in your own affect. We know that the excessive close-up of looking at the screen, we're closer to our computer screen than we would be to a human in a real life meeting, is more intense, and it's just unnatural to be in this kind of environment. So that makes it makes our brains kind of it's harder, I think, for us to attend to what's happening. And you'll have to repeat your question for me to get to the second half of it.
Yeah, the last one was just, is being fatigued, like, is that possible? And I think it definitely is. You kind of answered that there. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting too, how you mentioned that you're encouraging the students not to put their videos on, especially because I know sometimes a lot of professors would like the opposite, just to make sure that students are kind of present and just there. But yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to do it. So, we in my own class, of course, I encourage students, if they're not comfortable having their camera on for a whole variety of reasons, I'm perfectly fine with that. But there is an ability for the student to turn off their self view, but still be seen on camera, right? So what we suggest is that they turn off their self view so that when you're looking at Zoom, you only see the other people in class. You don't see yourself, because then that helps. It just helps with the fatigue, because you're not focused on a lot of different things. We know that the cognitive load is so much higher in a Zoom because there's so much more to attend to in a very unnatural way. And so, there's also, I have my background on, but there's also, animals and kids and neighbors and a, partner over here working. And right, so there's a lot more happening in our environments than just me talking into this camera. So that also has an impact on how fatigued we are.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of on the same boat. I have a puppy running around. She's just whining. So it's like those background things that are happening while you're trying to be at home. I totally get that. For our next question, this one is actually going to be for Dr. Moreno again. What is something that can help alleviate the stress and anxiety that could come from having to go to school online and in a remote setting?
Gosh, that's a hard question. Thanks for giving that one to me. Can you say it one more time to make sure that I don't go super off track?
Oh, yeah, of course. So the question is, what is something that can help alleviate the stress and anxiety that can come from having to go to school online and in a remote setting?
Well, I think really, really taking some time to this is going to sound kind of strange, but sort of practice a couple of different ways to be present in Zoom. So in other words, is it helpful to have a different screen view when you're actually in class? So what I mean by that is, is it easier for you as a student to just see the speaker and the presentation, perhaps if it's a PowerPoint presentation? Is it easier for you as a student to, do you do better when you see your peers and able to see, reaction in student debate, so to speak? Is chat an easier way for you to be engaged and to really experiment with those a little bit? Of course, making sure you understand the requirements that the faculty or the professor have, but knowing that there are multiple ways to engage and it doesn't have to be always just one way, I think is really important for a student to kind of think through there. Another piece that I think is really important that we and our online students try to share, it's hard, as I alluded to. It's been very difficult to be in the pandemic at home in whatever space you have, to potentially work, go to school, handle your family, other obligations, right? There's so much to be thinking about. So we encourage folks to think about having different spaces for different kinds of activities. So in other words, I may have, even if it's literally moving like a foot this way or turning my back, this way, to have a different sort of environment where I'm working versus studying versus watching TV or relaxing or working, with my family. Some of those help ease a little bit of the stress. But as with any student, we want to make sure that students are connected with the support services and professionals on campus so that they have folks that they can work through whatever the challenge or the roadblock or even however big or small it might be, to be able to have that supportive group of folks that can help work through whatever the current issue might be. I think that's really important. I know at CU, in our online environment, we have what we call student success coaches, and they're available to students to really help them, whatever it is, whether it's a service problem, like financial aid, or look, I literally can't be on Zoom for 1 more minute. So what else can I do? Right, to try to help support students and problem solve and coach in that way. So I don't know if that fully gets to it, but that would be some of my initial thoughts. Dr. Fleck, anything to add?
No, I think you're brilliant. I guess the only thing that I might say is just practicing those time management skills, really scheduling out when you're working, not only where, but when, and block it out like you were going to class or whatever that may be. And maybe some of that discipline and structure can help, at least for me, helps alleviate some of the stress that exists with heavy workload.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess I didn't mention that, I'm an introverted person by nature, and I need a lot of time after I'm socially connected, either in class or with my team or in a social situation. I need time afterwards to decompress and process or be alone or just not be around people, frankly. So knowing yourself in that way. And if you are an extrovert and you get your energy from being around people, then perhaps you need less time to decompress. But if you're an introverted person, I know I have to build into my schedule that time for a break. Otherwise, it gets way too overwhelming for me, and I begin to shut down. So knowing yourself and kind of working through that, I think, is also really important to build that time in.
Thank you both. The next question is for Dr. Fleck. When students are forced to attend courses online, whether due to dealing with the pandemic or university being unable to offer the class in person, do you think that impacts a student's mental health and ability to do well in that class?
So I think it can. I think it can impact their ability to do well. What we're seeing right now, well, let's start from the beginning. Emotions, mental health definitely color the way that students perceive the classroom, whether it's online or it's face-to-face. And that does affect their academic performance. Researchers have shown that. So those emotions can arise from what's going on in class, their own circumstances, or a global pandemic, which is very stressful. And so what we're also seeing right now is a increase in mental health prevalence on our campuses across the country. So there's been a lot of surveys that are done, and some of the most recent statistics are showing high levels of depression among students, high levels of anxiety. And we know that those two things in particular are very detrimental to performance. They negatively impact our ability to focus, energy level, your ability to sleep. And so all of this can have an effect not only on learning, but overall GPA, which can then further facilitate feeling down. And so these are definite problems. I don't know if in the literature they've shown that, when there's this transition to remote, or if you're being forced into remote, that it's particularly detrimental to mental health. I would assume so in the case of emergency remote instruction, just because of the stressors that folks are feeling outside of just the classroom experience. And so that would make sense as another additional barrier kind of in the mental health realm.
Thank you. The next question is going to be answered by either one of you. Does being online so much affect our ability to socialize in person?
I think that Dr. Moreno talks a little bit about introvert and extrovert and, what that means for her. I'm more of the extroverted type. So it's interesting because for me, like this, at least I get some of it in these kind of interactions. Otherwise, I'm at home in my four walls, just kind of sitting, going crazy and looking for people to talk to. And so there are just going to be differences amongst folks on how they're socializing and what that looks like. Some of the research on children and screen time, I would say is mixed. Some of it's done on gaming specifically, right? And so there are games that some like adolescents can play that does have them interacting with their peers in different ways than if it was face-to-face, but it's still interaction. And not all of it is as detrimental as folks might originally think that it is. However, anecdotally, you can see people walking around the streets just looking straight down at their phone. And, there's also this like weird thing now with people being vaccinated and finally getting together again of like, do I shake your hand? Do I hug you? I don't know, kind of stuff. And so I think it's complicated.
Yeah, I completely agree. If we're talking about, out into beyond the beyond the classroom, I think the experience, is so varied and complicated, because of the pandemic. I don't think being online in and of itself in a normal non-pandemic world, I don't think that stops us from being able to socialize, but the added impact of being home all the time certainly does. And certainly in classes, in terms of socialization that happens in the classroom or with peers, can also be, challenging. So if a student, for example, if a student really does not enjoy group work and never enjoyed group work even prior to the pandemic, may not view group work or Zoom or group breakout sessions very positively. No, they may, but they may not, because they already had this negative view of group work, right? So some of that, I think, comes into play as well. And I know as faculty and as peers and peer leaders, in an online course, we really need to make sure that we're asking very thoughtful questions, that we're really mediating discussion and allowing in a new way for everyone to have voice in those kinds of interactions, and really facilitating the student to student interactions or socialization, even if it's in a personal check-in sort of way at the beginning or towards the end of class. I think that's really important. You have to be careful, of course, because as a facilitator, you don't want that to waylay the entire course that you may have for that evening. But really finding ways to encourage all students to have voice in this environment, I think is really important. A little different than socialization, but still same concept.
Yes, I definitely agree. This one can be for both of you. What innovations have emerged in the last year, or what could we expect to see in the future that will further enhance the efficiency of remote learning?
Just to start us off, I think that faculty have had a shared experience now of teaching in this way. And so I'm personally very excited for conferences to start again so I can hear about all of the amazing things that my colleagues have done in the way that they have engaged their students, the assignments they've created, the challenges. Because now that we've had this shared experience, we can come together and be better teachers, right? By learning from one another. And so while that's not a specific like technology or something, having the colleagues around to kind of share all of that is going to be, I think it's going to be great for all of higher ed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think prior to the pandemic, there probably still there. I suspect there still is, but there was lots of mixed opinion about whether or not this type of environment could work. And I think that our faculty and students have done such a great job of shifting that I think that agreed we'll continue to see more interesting, innovative teaching pedagogy and techniques in classes, both remote, online, and probably will translate to the in-person as well. But from my perspective, I can only speak for myself. It has kind of forced me to be more creative in delivering curriculum and activities in classes than I would have ever been in a face-to-face type of, not that I'm not creative in face-to-face, but it certainly was a new way of thinking like, okay, how can I do an escape room and how can I make that relevant to, this particular curriculum? How can I do, how can I best use Google Docs to help reinforce learning? Those kinds of things. Whereas before, I'm not sure that we weren't forced into thinking, I wasn't forced into thinking about how it might be different, right? So I'm encouraged by what I have seen so far.
Thank you. For this question can actually be answered by the both of you. Could we expect a growth in the amount of online learning offered by universities? Is it here to stay?
I mean, I would say that there's definitely going to be remote and online courses just like there was before. I think that some students are really excited, and faculty too, to get back in the classroom and to start having that face-to-face experience again. And so I don't think that's going away, and I don't think that remote is going away. I think there's just going to be some more options. Now that faculty are more comfortable in the remote world, it will be easier for them to teach really good courses, in that modality. So definitely here to stay, but it's not going to be 100% either way, in my opinion. I think there will always be a nice mix.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, in the online, prior to the pandemic in Colorado, we had just over 80,000 students enrolled in a fully online program, not remote, but fully online, which is I think a large number. And I think as more students experienced this type of environment and found that they liked it, it was for them, they were very successful, that they may continue to do that. I think something we haven't necessarily talked about is the future of work in this country or the world, and how much work will be remote versus in person. And so I do think we have to start thinking about that. And if we're starting to see this trend where working from home or the remote working is more commonplace, how then can a remote education help a student really be prepared for working remotely more permanently? So there's some other, I think, pieces that we need to be thinking about the jobs of the future and how we help students prepare for that as well. Not that in-person jobs that will always be as well. So.
Thank you. And then just to wrap up here, do either of you have any other closing thoughts about online or remote learning?
I'll say that there are really, really great faculty members out there and really, really great courses. And so students, if you have had those good experiences, share that with department chairs and with the faculty who are working really hard behind the scenes to make that happen. I know that there are also experiences that are less than ideal. It's a difficult kind of world we're in right now. And so they're just knowing and having some optimism that this can be a successful way to learn also would be my happy rainbows and unicorns positive ending.
I would echo that completely with the unicorn ending. Yeah, I think you summarized it great.
Awesome. I would like to give a huge thank you to Dr. Moreno and Dr. Fleck. You have both made this hot topic very educational and informative. To our viewers, I hope you enjoyed listening in as well. If you like tuning into this live stream, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram to stay updated with reminders of all the upcoming events we have planned for the rest of the semester. Thank you all again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.